Hey everyone and welcome back. So, the pre-patch event has not happened yet, and that means you might be looking for something to do. Well, I've got good news. We have been testing classes like a pack of madmen over here, and today I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I think you really should check out. Stuff I think you'll have fun with, and these are some of the classes that I am super excited to play, and it's some of the stuff that's even in my running for the main of Shadowlands, as is the Drop.com X Sennheiser PC37X through today's sponsor, Drop.com. Now, the PC37X, to be pretty simple, it's the best value gaming headset I have seen thus far. They are super comfortable over ears, zero sweat ear pads, what I think is an ideal clamping force for long-term usage, and a nice low weight. So they're super comfy when you're playing WoW for like 8 hours straight.
The built-in mic is also fantastic. It's got great articulation, incredible sound quality, plus a feature that I really love. It actually auto-mutes
when you move it up to the upright position, which is pretty sweet. There's also a audio and hardware slider on the right cup, and that basically means you can change your volume without having to fiddle around with the Windows mixer. Then, of course, they're a collab with Sennheiser. You know Sennheiser, they're pretty darn good when it comes to audio, and that means that these are brilliant for both gaming and music. They kind of do it all at once. So, I recommend the PC37X. Drop.com is the place to get it, and over there, it's got 53,000 purchases, almost a 5-star review. It's pretty damn incredible. So, thank you to Drop for making this and supporting our team. Check them out in that link down below, and with that said, let's get into the video. Okay, we've just got to start today's video off with Shadow Priests. They got a revamp very late in the Shadowlands beta, and it's really good. You really should check it out. It's totally different in terms of its gameplay, even though, like, its spell names are mostly all the same. So you're still using, Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain, and, Mind Blast to generate Insanity. You're using Shadow Word Death and Execute Range, Mind Seer for your AoE generation. You might be then thinking, what makes it different? As it turns out, quite a lot. So what's different is you spend your Insanity on Devouring Plague, which does instant damage, a strong dot, and it heals you by a decent amount too. So that's basically your core, right? You maintain your dots, you generate Insanity, and you use Devouring Plague. Now, you might be then thinking, well, actually, where's the sauce here? What makes it special and fun? Well, there are other things. So Shadow Dots can give you an instant cast of Mind Blast. Now, that's one that you can actually cast while you are channeling Mind Flay, which feels a bit weird, but you do sort of get into the flow of it. So there you go. You really are, I think, true to the name of their mastery, shadow weaving when you're playing this. It's a very different core gameplay style, and I've got to say, it's one that really does work for me. And you really will see why once we get through into the talents and stuff. Now, another thing is Void Form. It's totally different. It is no longer the same, even though, again, the spell names are the same. So Void Eruption will, of course, send you into Void Form, just that now it's castable as a cooldown every 90 seconds. Void Eruption's button is then replaced by Void Bolt during Void Form, and Void Bolt, it does damage, it generates Insanity, it extends your dots as well, and of course whenever you pop that and you go into Void Form, you do get a charge of Mind Blast, and when you're in Void Form, it does increase your spell damage by 20%. So as far as cooldowns go, it's pretty neat, and it just meshes with the general gameplay of World of Warcraft a bit better, and it basically sort of avoids the problem that you used to have with this spec, where outside of Void Form, it just felt dead. That's no longer the case. Now, what's really good is that things get better when we talk about the talents. They are so elegantly designed. I was really impressed. Unfurling Darkness is pretty cool. So whenever you cast Vampiric Touch, your next Vampiric Touch is instant and will do instant damage. Now, this is really good if you're in a cleave situation and you want to spread Vampiric Touch about the place. And by the way, that effect can only happen, I think, once every 15 seconds. So you can, do your first Vampiric Touch and then use your instant one to just spread it onto another target. And that's really good if you've talented into Misery, which does cause Vampiric Touch to apply Shadow Word Pain. So you can really spread your dots around two targets super, super quick. And it's good for initiating fights too. But then the thing is, in single target, it's still a useful talent because, well, you can just wait until just before your little buff that gives you the instant Vampiric Touch, you can wait to just before that expires to use it again, which will, of course, do a bunch of instant damage, and then refresh all your dots. So it's really cool that that's one set of talents that works really well in AoE and single target. Okay, it might not be super ideal in single target, but I just think it's kind of neat, and there's just a lot of really elegant design going on there. Then Shadow Crash. It's just cool. That's why I bring it up. You hit the button, and then you can just fling down these 3 big shadow meteors. It just looks cool. It's really satisfying. And it's even got a single target component that's basically designed for you to pull 3 charges, all 3 charges of it, and then blast them all at once. So that's pretty cool. Then in the final tier, there's two actives. There's Surrender to Madness and Hungering Void, which lets you extend Void Form a little bit more. And yeah, look, that's basically it. This is not a full sort of deep dive into things. But for me, I found this to be like a bit more, like it's fast paced, it's engaging, you've got really cool talents. Whoever did this rework, especially considering how late in the day it was done, they did a really good job. So hats off to the team for this one. And with that said, let's move on to another class. Yeah, so I know we're going to be very dotty for the start of this video, but I'll tell you what, I am seriously impressed with the Affliction Warlock. Blizzard have basically tweaked it in such a way that I enjoy it a lot more in multi-dotting situations and even in places like leveling. So the basics are that you spread around Agony and Corruption on your targets. Then there's Unstable Affliction, your old Soul Shard spender. It no longer costs a Soul Shard, and it no longer stacks. Instead, it just exists as a damage over time that you can basically put on one target at a time. So, all of these dots tie into Malefic Rapture, which is your new spender. And it costs a shard, and it will deal damage to everyone who is suffering from your dots, and it will do more damage for each dot that is on each target. So seriously, right? You see when you spread some Agony around the place, and then you use Seed of Corruption to, cause a big explosion to get Corruption rolling, and then you just dump a bunch of chunky Raptures in, you see the numbers appear everywhere. It's very, very satisfying. I think it's a really good example of just set 'em up, knock 'em down style gameplay. Now, of course, pure single target situations are a little bit less interesting. I do think that's fair enough, though, considering that this is the Affliction Warlock. It's very much a multi-dotting spec, so I think it's good that it's doubling down on the most unique part of its identity. But, still, it is pretty fun, and there are a fair few talents that you can choose to basically spice up the single target a bit and just customize your gameplay. Overall, though, I think this was just a pretty successful little refresh of this spec. It's one I really enjoyed, and therefore I think you should definitely give it a shot. Next up, Enhancement Shaman. Oh wow, it is totally different to play. Now, it can risk getting a little bit crowded in terms of just the number of things that just pop up on your screen and demand your attention. So this is not one for people who do not like lots of cooldown management. But if you do like spinning those plates, and you do like a spec where there's a bunch of things going on, yeah, this spec doubles down on that aspect of things. So gone is the Maelstrom Bar and the builder-spender gameplay that defined them during, of course, the Legion and BFA expansions. Now, as normal, you will be using Lava Lash and Storm Strike, and your Storm Strike still can have its procs, but it all does feel a bit different because, they're all on their cooldowns. I mean, Lava Lash, right? That's on a cooldown now. That's a bit different to it just being your sort of general filler. Now, generally speaking, you want to keep Storm Strike and Lava Lash on cooldown, and then you want to get the rest of everything else done right. What does that mean? Well, it means, of course, that Flame Shock is there for your main damage over time. You want to have that up on your main target all the time, or maybe spread it around if you're in AoE. But then there's Frost Shock. Now, yes, Frost Shock, you could be using that for utility reasons, but also Frost Shock just for like straight up instant damage, it does more damage than Flame Shock. So if you're in a single target situation, you want to use a Flame Shock, and then of course you've got to remember they've got a shared 6-second cooldown. So you do a Flame Shock, and then you'll do a few Frost Shocks until, once again, you've got to refresh your Flame Shock. So that's one little plate to juggle, in addition to all the other little plates you've got to juggle. Now, and speaking of plates to juggle, there's a new mechanic. That's called Maelstrom Weapon, and that's where basically damage can give you a charge of Maelstrom Weapon, and each charge will reduce your next cast time by 20%, and it stacks up to 10 charges, meaning that yes, it can equate to 2 instant spell casts. Now that's normally going to mean an instant lightning bolt or chain lightning, but you could use it on something like Elemental Blast or Stormkeeper, which are both talents. And I'll say that's definitely one that I like playing around with as a resource, because yes, it's fun for your chain lightnings and your lightning bolts, but you can talent into, say, Hailstorm. And that's really good, because then it ties basically with Hailstorm. Whenever you spend like your charges of Maelstrom weapon, it pumps up your next Frost Shock. So there's like a little bit more synergy, but of course you've got to tie that into the sort of tick-tock between whether you're doing your Flame Shocks to keep the dot up or doing your Frost Shocks to get some damage in. So really, it's the kind of thing where this probably seemed like a humongous sort of elemental assault on you of all the things that are going on. I just think this is one, it's fast-paced, and you've just got to sit down and actually play it for a bit to get a feel for it. But really, in terms of feel, it does feel pretty different to play, I would say, and that's why it's on this video as something I think you should check out, because it has changed a bunch. Now, there are old high points of this that still do remain, like Crash Lightning is just a big spectacle in AoE. I think it looks cool. That still is quite fun. Then also, like your Elemental Spirit Wolves, they impact your gameplay a little bit more depending on the wolves that pop out, so that's pretty cool. They've done a little bit more with your Elementals, that's also cool. And you do get some old school things, which, you know, they're there for flavor. They may be a bit frustrating to some players, but that's stuff like, of course, enchanting your weapons with Flame Tongue and Wind Fury, then, of course, the Wind Fury Totem, and then generally they do just benefit from the unpruning. So because of all of this stuff, and this generally being a spec that people weren't too happy with in BFA, I do think it's worth checking out. Okay, next up, the Balanced Druid. Yeah, this has changed quite a bit because the Eclipse system is in, replacing the empowerments that we used to have. And basically this means that while your spells do have the same names, the spec does feel, I would say, pretty different to play versus, say, the empowerment system that people were used to in the BFA and Legion expansions, where your spells kind of got like empowered charges. So basically the way it works, right? And this is going to verbally, this is going to be really confusing, but it does click once you actually play it. But basically, a lunar or solar eclipse will empower its respective ability, Starfire or Wrath, as you would expect. Now, by default, casting 2 Wraths will start a lunar eclipse, which will then grant you the empowered Starfires. Now, the converse will happen if you cast 2 Starfires when you're out of an eclipse. What will happen is it will empower Wrath. Now, that's basically the decision that you make when you start combat. Which eclipse do I want to be in first? And that's something you even see reflected in the action bar where, you know, there'll be a 2 over the ability that can cause an eclipse. And every time you cast it, you know, it goes down from 2 to 1 and then from 1 to 0. And when that happens, it causes the eclipse. You'll get the hang of it once you actually play it. It is pretty simple. So yes, you do that, you get into your eclipse, and then based on what your eclipse is, you either spam Wrath or Starfire. And then, once that eclipse is over, let's just say you've been spamming Starfires during your eclipse, then you'll find that that will have 2 charges on it, sort of like little charge indicators in the action bar. Cast it twice, and then your other eclipse will begin. And then you'll be casting your other ability. And that's basically that, right? You'll pretty much be in the set train of sort of moving from one eclipse to the other one. You select which eclipse you want to start with at the beginning, and you basically ping-pong between them. There's not a massive amount of control, but there are things to play around. As an example, Star Surge has been redesigned. It will now increase the damage bonus of your eclipse, and that does mean that basically you want to pull 90 plus arcane power before an eclipse. You then want to get into your eclipse, spam the 3 Star Surges, and then just start, you know, attacking with a chain of your empowered eclipse ability. Again, it's the sort of thing you just have to play a little bit to sort of get, to be honest. And certainly if you get like Star-Lord and that, because Star-Lord is incentivizing you to do 3 back-to-back Star Surges, and then, you know, you can sort of see those things sort of lining up, and it basically doubles down on that gameplay, with of course Star-Lord being one of the talents. So that's what's going on there. Now, there are other key changes. Starfall, well, it's back to its old design. So if you just want to hit Starfall and jump about the place and just have, well, stars fall and damage your enemies, well, it'll do that. It's the old version. It's not a ground target thing anymore. So that's pretty cool. It's really nice for grinding AoE in old content, which a lot of people will appreciate. And what's also cool is if you talent into Stellar Drift, then you can cast while moving when Starfall is up, which is pretty sweet. So that's that. I mean, you still do have other things to consider, right? There's, you know, the various different talents. You've got New Moon, of course, is there as well. All in all, I would say this is one that it's got its rhythm. It may click with you, it may not. I think it's going to continue to be a bit like Marmite. Some people are just going to love it, some are going to hate it. This is quite a change, and because of that, I think it's worth giving a shot and seeing what you think. All right, next up, I just want to do a bunch of smaller callouts to things, and I'm going to start it off with the Elemental Shamans, even though they haven't really changed that much, and that's why I'm actually bringing it up, because earlier on, right, on beta, they had Maelstrom removed, and they basically got a revamp, right, like Enhancement did. But it didn't really work out, as it turned out, and Blizzard changed it back to actually using Maelstrom again. And that does mean that now, when you see it, it will be in a state that's fairly familiar to you if you've played BFA. Now, there are a few tweaks. You do have new talents, like Echoing Shock, which is certainly one new thing. So basically, it's a bit refined from live, but I'm calling this out just because if you're super hyped for this because you thought it was a different design, no, it is still the Maelstrom-based builder spender spec that you will be familiar with. All right, next back to the Druids, where there's Feral. It's got significant-ish changes. It's weird. So, of course, in addition to benefiting from the unpruning, it has seen Berserk be redesigned, Sabertooth be nerfed, and Blood Talons also be redesigned. It's weird. Sabertooth is far weaker now to the point where it's no longer as silly as it was in its buff extension power, so that's probably a good thing for the overall health of it. Berserk is also far better, right? They've essentially, to make that super quick to explain, they've moved the kit from the talented version of Berserk onto the baseline version, and that just does mean that the baseline version of this just plays a bit better, and it frees up maybe a little bit more, like, from sort of like a fun gameplay perspective, it frees up a bit more in that talent tree, or that talent row, which is pretty good. But I don't like the Blood Talons change. They tried, like, I think 2 iterations of it. I think it's a really big misfire. It does work in paper. Now, I will be real there. You can go onto a target dummy and start to use these, the new Blood Talons efficiently. Basically, the way it works is that if you use 3 different types of, like, generators in a row, like within 4 seconds, I think. Yes, within 4 seconds. Then you'll get the 2 charges of Blood Talons. Now, what that's going to mean is maybe you doing, a Rip, a Rake, and a Brutal Slash, or a Thrash, or something like that. Which, just doesn't feel great to me in terms of the control you have over it, as compared to the older version where, I just prefer the older Blood Talons. I don't know what to say. I just thought it was like more flexible. I felt like I had more power and control. Some of that could just be like a UX and sort of perspective thing for me, but I will say the current version just doesn't feel that great. Now, maybe it will click for you, and it certainly does feel pretty different to me, so that's probably a decent reason to check it out. As it stands, I think there's great potential in this spec, but I think that almost as always, it doesn't quite live up to it. I think Blizzard did have some noble design goals for this one, but I don't really think they actually, succeeded to meet them. Next up, the Marksmanship Hunter, because it's funny with Hunters. BM is still BM if you just want to be able to move free and be super powerful. Not super powerful in terms of the raw numbers, but, BM doesn't have a movement penalty. That's pretty big. So BM is still BM. Survival, I don't know. I think they've forgotten about it. It basically has got no changes. So that's a bit weird. SV, forgotten. I wouldn't be surprised if it was revamped at some stage, to be honest. But Marksmanship has seen a whole bunch of tweaks. Not redesigns, tweaks. Look, I never liked the new BFA Onwards version of this spec. I remember getting a lot of flack from that, and then wandering onto the Hunter Discords and finding out that actually a lot of the old school Hunters didn't like the BFA era of this spec anyway. So there's my biases. I fundamentally don't really like what it does, and I think it's really, really boring. But that said, there's been a lot of tweaks to focus and to flow. And even as somebody who doesn't particularly like this and thinks it's kind of boring, I will say it flows better now than it did in BFA, thanks to those changes that Blizzard made. I will still say that the whole, just whatever it is about you get the little charges, the arcane shots, I don't know, it doesn't feel good to me, even though something like, say, trick shots, I will definitely say trick shots is really damn cool. But basically, right, you do have things like rapid shot is a bit faster now. You've got some, I would say, pretty darn good talent changes too. So overall, it flows better and it feels better. Now, this was always a controversial spec. If you look at some of the OG or old school, maybe traditional Hunter communities, I think there's a bit of suspicion over how this has been since BFA. But I will say, right, if you were on the fence or you liked BFA Marksmanship Hunter, then I think with this design, and once you get a bit more gear, you'll probably like it more than you liked it in BFA. I think it's dreadfully boring. There's a decent chance, if you did like it, that it has got better for you. Next up, it's Paladin time. Paladins need a mention. So first up, basically Prot and Holy both use Holy Power as their main resource. That's pretty big, so it's worth giving that a shot to try it out. Now, what I was a bit more keen on for this video was just to talk about Ret, because Ret has not got sweeping changes, but it really goes to show how a series of small things add up and really do make it feel better to play. So your Holy Power intake is a lot smoother because you get Hammer of Wrath baseline, which, by the way, that's great in its own. You've got Hammer of Wrath all the time, sweet. But also, because that's baseline, you can then talent into Blade of Wrath instead of having to choose between those two abilities. So that's really nice for your Holy Power generation and just the broadness of your kit and like the buttons you can hit. Then Final Reckoning is just unique. I think it is worth playing around with, so you should go and do that. And then just generally the talent stuck out to me as being a really big win for the Paladins. There's lots of active abilities, great synergies. You've got the old school execution sentence too. But overall, what stuck out to me is it feels like there's genuine, like, interesting choices and fun gameplay customization within that talent tree. So I think that's a big success. Plus, Avenging Wrath with no global cooldown is pretty damn nice. Okay, next, a quick visit to the Brewmaster Monks, where something has happened that I think just addresses one or two little quibbles that I used to have with it, even though I did generally enjoy it quite a bit. Basically, you've got a bit more control now, where you can do a double purifying brew into a Celestial Brew, with Celestial Brew being new. And if you do that right, it just sort of pumps up like the absorb you get from it. That's pretty cool. It gives you a nice bit of control, which I think was sometimes a little lacking. But then what's cool is you can talent into Black Ox Brew. You can use that to reset your brew cooldowns, and then you can just go and repeat the double purify into Celestial Brew. So basically, it feels like a bit more of an oh shit button, which I think is pretty cool. You just have a little bit more agency and reactivity when it comes to taking the damage. So I think that anyway is a pretty nice change that I wanted to call out, and I suppose that's just like another little thing you can be doing in your gameplay. So yeah, if you've got one of those lying around, you should probably give it a spin to see what's up. Next up, the Demon Hunters. I'm probably not going to return to them for my main, almost definitely not, but starting with Havoc, there are some good things. But there is one rather annoying thing where Demonic, I think it lasts like a second, like not as long, shorter, maybe two. But basically, if you have Demonic talented and also Blind Fury talented, then you won't have enough time in meta to get a second Blade Sweep into the Demonic window. That kind of sucks, so that's a bit sad. But anyway, there are other changes that do shake up the talent. So, Essence Break basically replaces Dark Slash, but it's far more usable. You hit it, and it happens in front of you. So it's good for AoE, and yeah, it impacts your Chaos Strike and your Blade Dance. So that's pretty good. It like buffs them up by, well, basically your enemy will take 40% more damage from them. So that is pretty sweet. If you want that Dark Slash gameplay, but in a way where it's just, more accessible, sort of weaves into your gameplay a bit better. So that's pretty sweet. Then Glaive Tempest is a new talent that's essentially your Legion artifact weapon ability, but on an 18-second cooldown, so kind of neat for sustained AoE. Then on the same row as that, you've got Unbound Chaos. This is a strange one. So when you use Immolate, your next Fel Rush will cause a copy of you to basically slam down on your enemies, like around the area where your Fel Rush ends, and do a stack of damage. Now, that sounds really awkward to use, but I was surprised how much I enjoyed it, especially when I was leveling. But basically, like, even though it technically does damage at the end of your Fel Rush location, I've generally found that, like, unless you go straight through and far away from a target with the Fel Rush, it will still hit them. But I suppose really it does work quite well with Momentum. Of course, Momentum will be, doing more damage from your Fel Rush and stuff, but also it makes your Vengeful Retreat a lot better. So you can basically do a Vengeful Retreat and then an Unbound Chaos Fel Rush on the way in. And I actually found that to be a pretty fun little interaction. So yeah, that was something. I'd say it's pretty satisfying in AoE. Then also Immolation Aura, by the way, that's baseline now, and it just generates 20 Fury whenever you use it. That's pretty cool. And then there's the talented version of it that generates an extra 60 over time. In terms of other things, Fel Barrage has been moved over to the bottom talent row. It's been made a bit more powerful to make that make sense. But yeah, basically, right, there's every chance here that still a very simple and very boring build will end up performing best, and you'll feel like you've got to use that one. But overall, Blizzard have retired a few talents that didn't work out so well, and they've tried to put in a few new things to shake things up. That means that I think there is the potential for more enjoyable, more in-depth Demon Hunter gameplay. But of course, conduits, legendaries, and final balance will really be telling there. Then also for Vengeance, I should just call up the one main thing here, is that you now have Demonic, and a Demonic that actually triggers from your Fell Devastation, which is, I guess, kind of neat. Now, initially it felt quite bland, but Blizzard actually made the Vengeance Metamorphosis form a bit more interactive with your mechanics and your resources, so it does feel a bit better now. Does it fundamentally change Vengeance to make it like super different or super crazy fun? No, but it is a nice little tweak, so if you've got one lying around, I would say you should give it a shot. And wow, we've really went through so much here. I'm just going to do a few things to round us off, okay? So I'd recommend checking out the Unholy DK, and basically there's a few GCD-related problems that seem to have been cleaned up there, and just some iteration passes on it, which seems to be quite nice. And also, by the way, the DKs have got some new Runeforge enchants, but you're probably still going to be using Fallen Crusader, so there's a little bit to check out there. Also, for the mages, right, Arcane has got just a few passes of iteration, some nice changes, and generally, well, I think mages are doing kind of well, right? Like, Rune of Power now auto-casts from your main cooldown, and a whole bunch of stuff has came off the global cooldown as well. That stuff feels really good. Also, Fire Mage's Ignite spreading gameplay has been redesigned, and basically the redesign gives Phoenix Flames a pretty nice new gameplay niche as the primary spreader of the Ignite, so I think that's pretty solid stuff. Covering some other things for the rogues, things that called out to me are that for Assassination, they've doubled down on Toxic Blade. It's basically baselined now, it's baked in. I think that's really good. It was one of the more fun interactive things for me. And also Slice and Dice is baseline. And I think that basically making Toxic Blade kind of like the default playstyle, I think that's just a good move for the design of that overall. Then also for sub, it has got a bit of a tweak. It's got Black Powder as its finisher, which still isn't particularly subtle. And it's also got a bit of a different pace because Shadow Dance is now a less frequent cooldown. So there's that to contend with. Then for Outlaw, things are actually quite different indeed. Like, your abilities, you know, the names are the same, but they do slightly different things. Roll the Bones now has a longer cooldown, and that basically just means you can't endlessly re-roll it for buffs. So yeah, does it fundamentally solve the RNG-related issues for many people with this one? No, it doesn't really, but it does minimize them a fair bit, so I think that will be an improvement for a bunch of people. Then also, Dreadblades are back as a talent. That's neat. I love the pace that the Dreadblades Legion artifact gave that one, so that's kind of cool. And then also, Between the Eyes has been changed. It's now a rotational damage buff, so it's a bit interesting they decided to make that something you want to just have sort of kept up on your target. I think some people like that, others maybe won't as much. So basically that's what's up there. A big old wave of iteration. I think it's a bit less dependent on the RNG, so for a bunch of people, that will be pretty good news. Now, there are, of course, many specs in World of Warcraft, and we purposely didn't cover them all here. We just wanted to do a bunch of quick hitters, things you can go and check out, stuff that's sort of called out to us. And yeah, like for tanks and healers, there's been less changes generally than for DPS, I'd say, so there's not as much to cover there. But yeah, there is lots of stuff that we haven't covered here. This is the stuff that called out to us. I think the only class that we haven't really covered is the Warriors. And basically your situation there is mostly, like for DPS anyway, they're just trucking on being warriors, right? Fury's Fury, Arms is Arms, no big changes there. But, you know, there are some little tweaks and stuff. Though, this is the one thing that has got a bunch of warriors. I don't want to say busted talent synergies. They weren't busted in a bad way. They were just super strong and super synergistic. But the talent reshuffle has kind of, well, that combined with losing Azerite traits and stuff has made the super powerful feel of late BFA prot quite a bit weaker. So that will feel weaker, but yeah, there you go. Now that I've mentioned the Warriors, I think technically we've covered everything at least once and sort of mentioned it in some way. Okay, there you go. Speaking of Warriors, I hope you've enjoyed our whirlwind tour of the pre-patch classes, and I hope that's at least given you a few pointers and things to check out in-game, because I know it's pre-patch, you can level up all these characters, but there's not an event to play yet, so you might be wondering what to do, and maybe this will help give you some ideas, maybe guide you towards your main decision a little bit. But of course, our main-related content will, well, we're working on it right now. It'll be out in the coming weeks. That's it for me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.